Sometimes the most ordinary moments hide the most extraordinary secrets. Tonight's story begins with a single challenge on a rooftop, one that would change 2 lives forever. If this story keeps you curious, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and hit the bell. And tell us in the comments where in the world are you watching from? We love to hear your stories too. He couldn't even find the ignition. That's what Emma Keller thought when her chief of staff, Marcus Stein, tilted his chin toward the quiet janitor, wiping a stubborn scuff near the edge of the helipad. Go on, Marcus murmured, mischief in his voice. It'll break the tension. Emma let herself smile for the first time all day. The deal pressure had been crushing. A moment of levity felt like oxygen. She pointed at her personal helicopter, rotors still, cabin glass reflecting a pale sky. You, she called, and the janitor looked up, surprised, as if yanked out of a different life. My assistant and I have a little wager. If you can fly this helicopter, I'll marry you. Marcus snorted behind her. The janitor, Daniel Bauer, according to the badge clipped to his pocket, just watched her for a beat, unreadable, then wiped his hands on a rag and walked straight past them to the pilot door. Emma expected the pantomime. A clumsy climb into the seat, a fumbled glance at switches, maybe a nervous laugh. Instead, Daniel moved like muscle memory was pulling the strings. Harness, seat trim, avionics scan, ignition sequence. The first low whine of the turbines curled across the roof, and Marcus's smirk wilted into confusion. Emma's stomach tightened. The rotor disc blurred to glass. Downwash clawed at her hair and jacket. She opened her mouth to abort too late. The skids unglued from the pad in a smooth, ruler-straight lift. 20 feet. Hover. A precise pedal turn. A bow of the nose like the aircraft itself was saying, "Good evening." And then a short outbound arc that skimmed the skyline before returning to a rock-solid hover. The set-down was so gentle she felt it in her ribs more than she heard it. Silence rushed in, heavy as a door closing. Daniel shut everything down, popped the latch, stepped out, and walked back to his cart. He didn't look at them. He aimed a spritz of cleaner at the scuff and went right on scrubbing, as if the last 90 seconds had been a screensaver only he could see. "Who are you?" Emma asked, voice not quite steady. He finally lifted his gaze. "Just the janitor, ma'am." A flicker of something older than fatigue passed through his eyes. Then he pushed the cart toward the exit. The steel door thudded shut on its hinges. The rest of the day refused to make sense. Emma ran a company where there were no unknowns, no surprises beyond the ones she orchestrated. Yet a man who flew like that was mopping floors on her payroll, and her background check protocols had never pinged. Marcus tried to laugh it off, natural talent, maybe a flight sim nerd, but the image of Daniel's hands moving without hesitation kept intruding on Emma's focus like a quiet siren. When the board chairman's message vibrated across her phone, "Our partners are wavering." "Fix it." She snapped back to the screens and spreadsheets, but a second knot had settled in her chest. One was the deal. The other wore a name patch and carried a spray bottle. That night, the city's glass glow felt colder than usual through her office windows. Emma pulled up Daniel Bauer's file. Sparse. Recent hire. Logistics and maintenance history. No references beyond a generic contractor. No flight school. No service record. No social media worth the name. Clean as an empty hallway. Too clean. The janitor who could roll a helicopter like a violin bow. The executive who couldn't stop replaying the sound of rotors slicing the air. Sleep didn't come. The absurd promise she'd thrown like a joke, "I'll marry you," echoed in the quiet, and she found herself wondering whether she'd just made a vow to a ghost. Marcus arrived early with coffee and reassurance, the kind that sounded practiced. Tiny misread. "We'll massage the terms, show respect, the usual choreography." Emma scanned the memo he'd drafted, a concession on the logistics arm dressed up as mutual alignment. It looked tidy, but something about the wording felt like surrender wrapped in silk. She signed with a warning she intended Marcus to feel in his bones. If this turned into a bloodletting, his name would be first on the report. On the way to the elevator, she caught movement through the glass. Daniel, far below, guiding a cart down a hall, head tilted like he was listening for a sound no one else could hear. She told herself to keep walking. The mandatory company picnic landed 2 days later, a circus of food trucks, inflatable games, and forced smiles. Emma usually did a quick lap and vanished. This time she stayed. She found Daniel on a blanket with a girl who had the same serious eyes and a mess of brown hair that wouldn't obey any brush. "This is Lily," he said when Emma hovered, formal as a guard, protective without being rude. "Your face is very serious," Lily told Emma, unbothered. "Are you in trouble?" "Constantly," Emma said, and surprised herself by meaning it. Lily held up a leaf and twig boat. "For the Frog King." "That is a structurally sound vessel," Emma said, and Daniel almost smiled. Then a high-end drone zipped overhead, its motors a waspish buzz that sliced the afternoon air. Daniel's shoulders locked. His eyes tracked the drone's arc like a gun sight. A flinch, not theatrical, not big, just enough to betray the body's expectation of the wrong kind of thunder following that sound. The father on a blanket thinned. Something colder slid into place for a heartbeat. The drone zipped away. Daniel forced his breath back into the shape of ordinary. "Ice cream, Dad?" Lily asked, oblivious. "Sure, kiddo." He rose, nodded to Emma with a politeness that was also a boundary, and melted into the crowd. Across the lawn, Marcus watched Emma watching Daniel. He didn't miss the look on her face, the curiosity narrowing into respect, the respect into an interest she hadn't felt in a long time. He took out his phone. A brief text, no names. "She's distracted. Move up the timeline. I want the projections on desks first thing Monday, the version we discussed." He pocketed the device with a smile that never reached his eyes. Emma thought she was following a thread. Marcus was weaving a net. Monday broke like a gavel. Messages from the board came harder, colder. Their partners had interpreted the gesture of goodwill as weakness and arrived with a list of demands that read like a confiscation notice. Emma's pulse went flat. She called legal, finance, strategy, each voice describing the same corner from different angles. Either she fed the partners her leverage or risked an ugly fight she might not win. She stood at the window and looked toward the helipad where the machine sat gleaming and useless. Freewill was a joke with a polished paint job. At dusk, she found Daniel alone on a silent floor, pulling a squeegee down a glass wall in clean, hypnotic stripes. "I need your other job," she said without preface. He didn't blink. "I have one job." "I saw you with the drone," she said, and his mouth tightened by a millimeter. She laid it out. There was a private gatekeeper to their partners, a man who respected character more than numbers. Weather rolling in. Commercial flights grounding. Her pilot out. No paper trail. No excuses. "I need a pilot who doesn't exist." Daniel walked to the door. "Then find one." "What about Lily?" Emma said, hating herself even as she aimed the words. "The copays, the medication, the lifetime cap." He froze like she'd put a hand on a live wire. She offered a trust. Irrevocable. Funded in full before Wheels Up. Medical. Education. Security forever. He stared past her into a place with too much dust and heat and lost to name. When he spoke, it was in a voice that lined up with orders and consequences. "Fine, but on my terms." The transformation was instant. Cargo pants. Worn leather jacket. A go bag packed with movements that telegraphed checklists and contingency plans. On the roof, Daniel walked the helicopter like a surgeon reviewing a patient, flashlight tracing rotor routes, lines, and fittings. He asked for an air-gap tablet with live weather and coordinates, no company network, no bleed. Emma strapped into the left seat without argument. "You do exactly what I say," he said, tone flat as a runway. "Crystal," she answered, clipping the harness. Takeoff wasn't pretty. Pretty was for air shows. This was efficient, clean, and ruthless. The city dropped away to a lace of lights. For a long stretch, there was only engine thrum and the small noises of a cockpit that knew how to keep its secrets. "Why this?" Emma finally asked. "Why floors when you can fly?" "Because flying gets people killed," he said. The weather found them like an ambushed black wall where the horizon should be, rain like handfuls of nails against the plexiglass, crosswinds that shoved the airframe sideways on invisible rails. A low alarm nagged. Another chimed in. Emma's hand whitened on the seat frame. "Look at me," Daniel said, steady. "Breathe. I've got you." They dropped, the kind of drop that leaves the stomach alone in the dark. Daniel eased them into a violent layer, then pulled a tight bank under a shear that smoothed the madness by degrees. "You don't fly the weather," he said. "You fly the machine through it." When the air finally gave, Emma realized she'd been measuring time in seconds between lightning pulses. A faint light winked ahead, stuttering through rain. The island's pad was a scar in the rock, wet and mean. Daniel sat down with one last controlled bump and killed the turbines. Wind and rain swallowed the world. Inside a house that smelled of cedar and tea, the gatekeeper listened. He was old in the way steel gets old harder, not softer. Emma laid out the case that should have worked in any sane room. It didn't. You measure the worth of a partnership in margins, the old man said. He measures it in loyalty. He turned to Daniel. And you? You risked this flight for her numbers. Daniel's jaw worked. No, sir. I risked it because when plans break, you trust the person who stays calm in the fire. The old man watched the two of them until something in his face let go. He reached for a phone. One call. One quiet conversation that shifted the weight of a storm Emma couldn't see. They lifted into cleaner air, a different kind of silence between them. Relief threatened to break through Emma's ribs. Her phone vibrated with a single message that dodged the dead zones. Emergency board session. Language that accused her of recklessness, instability, unauthorized use of assets. Marcus had written this with a smile. How fast can we get back? She asked. Daniel studied the radar, the fuel, the ugly smear of weather between them and the pad where this had started. Not fast enough by the safe route. He outlined a corridor along the storm's edge like sprinting a knife's length without flinching. Then don't miss, Emma said. He turned them into the kind of air that tries to throw you out of the sky and made it carry them home. Between jolts, truth slid loose. Marcus hadn't misread. He'd engineered the misread. The sudden illness sidelining her pilot. The concessions that smelled like weakness. The quiet leaks. Emma hated how natural the words tasted. I trusted him. Daniel didn't say I told you so. He told a shorter story instead about someone brave who hadn't come home. About the day he decided a mop never leaves a family with a flag and a folded note. The rest of the flight was the kind of silence people sit in when they've said the thing that matters. They hit the pad with minutes to spare, blades feathering down into a dawn that hadn't made up its mind. They expect you to flail, Daniel said, unclipping. So flail. Buy me time. Emma handed him her master keycard and an admin password she'd never said out loud. No hesitation. No legalese. Just the small nod of someone who decided that if she fell, she'd at least fall forward. Daniel vanished into stairwell shadows as Emma walked into a room where no one was going to wait for her to finish a sentence. The boardroom's air ran cold. Marcus perched near the vice chair like a well-trained conscience. He had charts that trembled in exactly the right places, emails that suggested concern without quite accusing, a cadence that sounded like loyalty with a safety valve. Emma did what Daniel told her to do, argued, bristled, threw sparks. People who had already decided she was unstable found proof in the way she breathed. Across the table, eyes slid toward Marcus for steadiness, toward the vice chair for permission to be disappointed. 2 floors down, a door beeped green on a scanner and let Daniel into the hum of machines that never sleep. He didn't bother with the encryption, there wasn't time. He hunted the place Marcus had hidden inside the network, the ghost port, the partition that didn't exist until you asked the right-wrong question. He wrote a loop that pointed traffic back into the dead space, a snake biting its own tail. In the boardroom, the main screen hiccuped, then drowned in crimson alerts. Tablets and laptops joined the chorus. Network integrity failure. The wall read, in letters big enough to shame. Marcus stood too quickly. I can isolate it, he said, already moving, already sweating. The vice chair waved him through with a gratitude that tasted like surrender. At the terminal in his office, Marcus fed his credentials to the beast with a tenderness that betrayed intimacy. He launched a purge at the only thing he truly loved, the secret he'd built. In the server room, Daniel watched the command sequence like a hunter waiting for a breath. Purge partition, true. He didn't block it. He recorded it time, user, action, the forensic signature you tattoo into a case when you wanted to survive 5 attorneys and a grand jury. The alarm stopped like someone had pulled the plug on a dream. Marcus walked back into the boardroom composed and faintly heroic. Corrupted packet, he announced, hands open. Legacy server. I've purged the anomaly. He didn't look at Emma when he said anomaly. He didn't have to. The vice chair cleared his throat. Given the events, let's proceed to the vote. Emma felt the floor tilt the way it does when you realize the story is going to end and the wrong person wrote it. The doors opened. A man in a leather jacket crossed the carpet like he didn't remember the last time a room like this had looked him in the eye. He set a tablet in front of the vice chair and tapped play. The big screen replaced prophecy with memory. Credentials, timestamps, a command trace, purge partition, the kind of evidence that doesn't blink under fluorescent lights. Emma let the quiet gather its weight. During this meeting, she said, each word steady enough to measure, Mr. Stein accessed a hidden archive and destroyed it. That archive contained external correspondence with our rivals. The last word felt like a tool you only use when you mean it. Marcus tried volume first, then indignation, then pity. None of it mattered against his own keystrokes, stamped onto the room's attention like a boot print. Security walked him out past chairs that suddenly had no owners. Apologies followed Emma like a tired rain. She didn't enjoy them. She watched Daniel instead, because he was the only person in the room who looked like he wanted to be somewhere else. When the room emptied, the sun got in through the glass and found the dust. Emma and Daniel stood in it like two people who had come back from a place with bad weather. "What now, contractor?" she asked, half a smile that didn't know how to finish. "Now my contract's over," he said. "Name's Daniel." "Emma," she returned, because titles felt like costumes that had done their job and could be hung up for an hour before they were needed again. A story like this runs through a building faster than coffee. The janitor who saved the company. The assistant marched out by security. The storm. The flight. The way the CEO looked at a man in a jacket like she'd remembered something you can't write into a quarterly report. Within days, legal made a neat stack out of Marcus's mess. Their partners came back to the table under new terms that smelled like respect instead of opportunity. The stock steadied. The board pivoted into the posture of people who had never doubted the person they had almost fired. Emma didn't bask. She couldn't shake the shape of an absence. Daniel's resignation arrived as a short, careful message. He declined his last paycheck. He didn't answer the single text Emma let herself send. "Are you okay?" The hallways felt sterile again, the kind of clean that doesn't mean safe, only empty. The problem had never been the numbers. It was the way the building taught people where to stand and when to speak. Emma called a town hall and told the truth with the kind of voice that finds its courage by spending it. A company isn't its sheet of counts. It's the hands that keep it moving. How many people had she never seen because she'd learned to look past the uniforms? She launched a division with a name that sounded grand and a purpose that didn't. Find the talent hiding in plain sight and give it away out of the closets and copy rooms where it was wasting oxygen. Training, scholarships, rotation tracks that moved people because they were ready, not because their title had aged sufficiently in the file system. It wasn't charity. It was the only way the place would deserve to keep its lights on. There was only one person who should run it, and he had already said goodbye. She found Daniel where kindness looks like a sandbox. Lily handed her a plastic shovel like it was a key. "You're the serious lady," Lily said, matter of fact. Emma knelt in a suit that would never quite forgive her for it. She made her pitch to Daniel without theater. Lead the new division, set the rules, make sure no one who can fly gets left pushing a broom, because nobody asked the right question. "I'm not a manager," he said. "I'm nobody." "You're the only person who asked me to breathe in a storm," she said, and hated how much of herself she was handing him to make the point. Lily tugged Daniel's sleeve. "You fix things," she told him, like she was tired of adults missing the obvious. He took a long breath that sounded like grief finding a different job. "Okay," he said, and when he smiled it reached his eyes without permission. They shook hands on a mission that didn't need maps, only doors. 6 months has a way of removing the drama and leaving the work. The new division became the place people emailed when they remembered they used to love the part of themselves that made, solved, built, learned. A clerk who doodled logos on packing slips took a design course on the company's dime and started rethinking the brand's edges. A night shift tech with a voice that could keep a room awake at 3 a.m. moved into training and cut onboarding time in half just by telling the story better. On a quiet evening, the roof looked like the beginning of a city instead of the end of a building. Daniel stood at the rail with Lily's hand in his, the pad empty, the air finally not asking anything of either of them. Emma joined them with a small smile that didn't need to be big to be honest. "I think I still owe you something," she said. He frowned. She said it anyway. "If you could fly this helicopter, I'd marry you." He laughed, a real sound, the kind that doesn't rehearse. The joke had turned into a promise while no one was looking. The thing about vows made like dares is that they don't feel like vows until you realize you've kept them in 100 small ways. Emma didn't plan anything out loud. Daniel didn't either. They adjusted schedules around a science fair, around late-night calls that were about people instead of numbers. They learned the cadence of each other's silences. The building learned, too, how to notice the woman with the mop who could solve a supply chain riddle in an afternoon, the man from security who could code his way out of a paper bag, the intern who didn't belong in any department because he belonged in 3. One afternoon, the past knocked, not with a fist, with an email flagged and routed by a system Daniel had taught the company to use like a sense. A name he didn't say out loud pinged in a log, someone probing the perimeter, looking for an old ghost port that no longer existed because he'd burned it down in front of a room that had tried not to believe its eyes. Daniel felt a familiar settling inside him, the readiness that always smelled like rain. He called Emma. "We have a visitor," he said. "Not inside." "Not yet." "Do we need to be worried?" she asked. He thought about the old days when worry was a measure of how fast you could bleed. "No," he said. "We need to be ready." That night, on the roof, the helicopter sat with its weight on the world like a promise no one was in a rush to collect. Lily ran a finger along the skin of the fuselage, curious and respectful. "Will you fly again?" she asked her dad. Daniel looked at Emma. "Maybe," he said, "but not to run, not to chase, just to go somewhere with people who know how to breathe." Emma squeezed his hand. They were quiet for a while, the kind that doesn't need anything. She felt the bet between them, the silly one and the real one. When the interruption came, it didn't have alarms. It had a call from legal. The case against Marcus had spawned cousins, civil, criminal, the whole beautiful, boring machinery of consequences. There would be testimony. There would be questions. The company would be dragged through one more round of microscope. Emma felt the old tension creep up her spine. Daniel's presence bled it out of her like heat, leaving a metal part. "You've finished machining. We'll tell the truth," he said. "And we'll talk about Lily's science project if anyone gets cute." He could do that, reset the horizon line with a single sentence. On the morning they signed the last settlement paper, the building felt like a place that had learned to breathe on purpose. Emma stepped out onto the helipad with a small box in her pocket and a question she had once asked as a joke caught in her throat for real. Daniel arrived with Lily, who had drawn something that looked suspiciously like a helicopter wearing a veil. "It's a cape," Lily clarified, exasperated. Emma laughed. "Of course it is." She turned to Daniel. "I have something ridiculous and serious to ask you," she said, voice shaking in a way that felt like wind at altitude. He didn't make it easier or harder. He just looked at her like people look at the horizon when they've earned the view.